The gunshot echoed through the vast Montana territory as Hannah Hayes steadied her trembling hands, the smoking pistol still warm in her grip. The year was 1878, and at 26 years old, Hannah had learned that survival in Williamsburg, Montana, meant being prepared for anything, even if that meant defending the small plot of land she'd inherited from her late father. "Next time, aim for the head," she muttered to herself, watching the coyote limp away into the tall prairie grass. It had been after her chickens again, the third time this week. Hannah tucked the pistol into the pocket of her worn apron and turned back toward her modest homestead. The two-room cabin wasn't much, but it was hers, the only thing she had left of her family after the fever had taken both her parents 3 years prior. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as Hannah went about her chores. The drought had been particularly brutal this summer, making every drop of water precious. She was hauling the day's second bucket from the well when she spotted a figure on horseback approaching from the east. Visitors were rare this far out from town, and Hannah instinctively moved her hand to her apron pocket, fingers brushing against the cold metal of her pistol. As the rider drew closer, she could make out the broad shoulders of a man, his hat pulled low against the glaring sun. His horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, moved with surprising grace for its size. The stranger raised his hand in greeting, and Hannah nodded cautiously in return. "Morning, madam," he called out, his voice carrying across the distance between them. "Name's Isaac Young. I'm looking for the Hayes property." Hannah's grip on the bucket handle tightened. "You found it. I'm Hannah Hayes." The man Isaac dismounted with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. Up close, Hannah could see he was perhaps a few years older than her, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his hat. He had a strong jaw, partially covered by a neatly trimmed beard that was the same rich brown as his hair. "Miss Hayes, I've come from Billings with some news." He removed his hat, holding it respectfully against his chest. "I worked with your father some years back. We drove cattle together from Texas to Montana in '72. Hannah's heart quickened. "You knew my father?" Isaac nodded. "Joseph Hayes was a good man. Taught me most of what I know about cattle. When I heard about his passing, I meant to come sooner, but I've been working ranches across 3 territories. What brings you here now, Mr. Young?" Hannah asked, still wary of this stranger despite his connection to her father. "Your father saved my life during that cattle drive," Isaac explained. "Pulled me from a river crossing gone wrong. Before we parted ways, he made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I'd check on his daughter out in Williamsburg." He paused. "Took me longer than it should have to honor that promise." Hannah studied him, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she gestured toward the cabin. "I was about to make coffee. You're welcome to join me if you'd like." Inside the cabin, Hannah busied herself with the coffee pot while Isaac took in the modest but tidy space. A small collection of books sat on a shelf, and a patchwork quilt draped over the back of a rocking chair. "You manage this place on your own?" Isaac asked, genuine admiration in his voice. Hannah poured the coffee into 2 mismatched cups. "I do what needs doing. The crops haven't been great with the drought, but I get by with the chickens and vegetables. Trade in town when I need to." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "It's not easy, homesteading alone." "Neither is leaving," Hannah replied. "This land was everything to my father. It's all I have left of him." They fell into an easy conversation as Isaac shared stories of his travels and the cattle drive with her father. Hannah found herself laughing for the first time in months as Isaac recounted how her father had once scared off a bear by simply shouting nonsense words and waving his arms. He always did have a way with animals, Hannah said, smiling at the memory. Even the ornery ones. As the afternoon waned, Isaac stood reluctantly. I should be heading back to town before nightfall. I've taken a room at the boarding house. Hannah walked him to the door. How long will you be staying in Williamsburg? Not sure yet, Isaac answered honestly. I've been on the move for so long, I'm thinking it might be time to put down some roots. He replaced his hat and tipped the brim slightly. Would it be all right if I called on you again, Miss Hayes? Hannah felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer heat. I'd like that, Mr. Young. In the days that followed, Isaac became a regular visitor at the Hayes homestead. He arrived each morning with the sunrise, helping Hannah with the more demanding chores, repairing the chicken coop, patching the roof, digging irrigation trenches to salvage what they could of her struggling crops. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Isaac cleared his throat nervously. I've been offered a job at the Miller Ranch, foreman position. Hannah looked at him, surprised to feel a pang of disappointment. That's a good opportunity. It is, Isaac agreed. It would mean staying in Williamsburg. His eyes met hers. If there's reason enough to stay. Hannah felt her cheeks flush as she understood his meaning. I think you might find Williamsburg has a lot to offer a man looking to settle down. Their first kiss came a week later, under the shade of the old oak tree where Hannah's father had been laid to rest. It was gentle and tentative, both of them unsure but willing to explore this newfound connection. As summer turned to fall, Isaac proved himself not just as a skilled ranch foreman but as a man of his word. He built a life in Williamsburg, and with each passing day, he and Hannah grew closer. By the time the first snow fell, Isaac had moved his few belongings into the cabin, and they were married in a simple ceremony at the town church, with only a few neighbors and Isaac's fellow ranch hands as witnesses. Winter in Montana was harsh, but the newlyweds found warmth in each other's arms. Hannah taught Isaac about running the homestead, while he shared his knowledge of cattle and horses. Together, they began to transform the struggling property into a viable small ranch. I've been thinking, Isaac said one night as they lay beneath the patchwork quilt, the winter wind howling outside their cabin. What if we used some of my savings to buy a small herd come spring? This land could support 20 head to start, maybe more as we expand. Hannah turned to face him in the dim light of the dying fire. You'd want to invest your money in my father's land. Isaac's hand found hers beneath the covers. Our land, Hannah, our future. Spring brought new beginnings. With Isaac's savings, they purchased 15 head of cattle and 2 horses. The drought had finally broken, and the land seemed to celebrate with an abundance of wildflowers and green grass. Hannah found herself singing as she worked, a happiness she'd never expected to find after losing her parents settling deep in her heart. It was a warm day in late April when Hannah first suspected she might be with child. She'd been feeling unusually tired, and certain smells from the kitchen suddenly turned her stomach. She kept her suspicions to herself, not wanting to raise Isaac's hopes until she was certain. By May, there was no denying the changes in her body. She waited until Isaac returned from a long day with the cattle, his face lighting up at the sight of her waiting on the porch. "You're looking mighty pretty this evening, Mrs. Young," he said, dismounting and securing his horse to the post. Hannah took a deep breath. "Isaac, I have something to tell you." His expression immediately turned concerned. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I'm more than all right," she assured him, taking his hands in hers. "Isaac, I believe I'm carrying your child." The joy that transformed his face was something Hannah would remember for the rest of her life. Isaac lifted her off her feet, spinning her around as he whooped with delight. "A baby! he breathed when he finally set her down. Our baby. That night, as they lay together planning their future, Isaac's hand resting protectively over Hannah's still flat stomach, she couldn't remember ever feeling so complete, so hopeful for what was to come. But life on the frontier was unpredictable, and happiness often came with unforeseen challenges. The trouble began in early summer when a band of cattle rustlers started targeting the smaller ranches around Williamsburg. At first, it was just a few head here and there losses that were frustrating but not devastating. Then the Petersons, whose ranch bordered the eastern edge of town, lost nearly half their herd in a single night. "This can't continue," Sheriff Donovan declared at the town meeting. "I'm calling for volunteers to form a night watch. We need to catch these thieves before they bankrupt every small rancher in the county." Isaac was among the first to volunteer, despite Hannah's concerns. "We can't afford to lose our cattle," he reasoned. "Not with the baby coming." Hannah knew he was right, but worry gnawed at her as Isaac rode out each night to take his turn patrolling. Her pregnancy was progressing well, her belly now visibly rounded beneath her dresses, but the constant anxiety left her exhausted. It was a stormy night in August when Hannah's worst fears nearly came to pass. Isaac and 2 other ranchers had tracked the rustlers to a canyon 10 miles north of town. What they hadn't known was that the thieves were part of the notorious Turner gang, wanted in 3 territories for robbery and murder. The ambush came swiftly. One of the ranchers, an older man named Hank, was shot in the shoulder. Isaac managed to return fire before retreating with his wounded companion, but not before taking a bullet that grazed his side. Hannah was awakened by pounding on the cabin door well past midnight. She found Isaac leaning heavily against the doorframe, his shirt soaked with blood that appeared black in the dim lamplight. "It's not as bad as it looks," he assured her, grimacing as she helped him to the bed. "Just a graze. Hank's worse off. Doc Thompson's with him now." Hannah's hands trembled as she cleaned and dressed his wound. "You could have been killed," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Isaac reached up to wipe away her tears. "But I wasn't. I came home to you just like I always will." The next day, Sheriff Donovan organized a larger posse, including several experienced lawmen from neighboring counties. They rode out at dawn, leaving the women and children of Williamsburg to wait anxiously for their return. Hannah spent the day alternating between tending to Isaac and praying for the safety of the posse. By nightfall, word came that the Turner gang had been captured after a fierce gunfight in which, miraculously, no one on either side had been killed. The rustled cattle were being rounded up and would be returned to their rightful owners within days. As summer faded into fall, life in Williamsburg settled back into its normal rhythms. Isaac's wound healed cleanly, leaving only a thin scar along his ribs. Hannah's belly grew rounder with each passing week, and the couple spent long evenings by the fire discussing names and dreams for their child. "If it's a boy," Isaac said one night, his hand gently caressing Hannah's stomach, "I'd like to name him Joseph, after your father." Hannah smiled, placing her hand over his. "And if it's a girl, how about Mary after my mother?" Isaac suggested. The baby, sensing their voices, kicked vigorously, making them both laugh. "I think that's a yes," Hannah said. The first snow of winter came early that year, blanketing the land in white just as November began. The cattle were healthy and well fed on the summer grass they'd managed to store as hay, and Isaac had built a sturdy addition to the cabin, a proper bedroom for their growing family. Hannah was in her 8th month when the blizzard struck. It came without warning, transforming the peaceful snowfall into a howling monster that shook the cabin and obliterated the landscape in white fury. Isaac had barely made it back from the barn after securing the animals when the full force of the storm hit. "Never seen one come on this fast," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "We're in for a rough night." Hannah felt a twinge of discomfort as she moved to stoke the fire, but dismissed it as the normal aches of late pregnancy. By midnight, however, she could no longer deny what was happening. The baby was coming, a full month before they'd expected. "Isaac," she gasped, gripping his arm as another contraction seized her. "The baby's coming." Panic flashed across his face. "Now, but it's too early." He glanced toward the window, where snow continued to fall in blinding sheets. "There's no way to get to town for the doctor in this." "Then you'll have to help me," Hannah said, struggling to keep her voice steady despite her fear. "Women have been having babies without doctors since the beginning of time." The next 12 hours were the longest of Hannah's life. The contractions came in relentless waves, each one seeming to last an eternity. Isaac was her rock, his voice a constant reassurance as he heated water, gathered clean linens, and held her hand through the worst of the pain. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he told her as dawn broke, the storm finally beginning to ease. "You can do this, Hannah. You and our baby are going to be just fine." But as the morning wore on, Hannah's strength began to fade. The contractions were coming closer together, yet the baby seemed no closer to arriving. Fear crept into Isaac's eyes, though he tried to hide it from her. "I think the baby might be turned wrong," Hannah whispered during a brief respite between contractions. "My mother told me stories of difficult births." Isaac pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. "What can I do? Tell me what to do, Hannah." "You may need to help turn the baby," she said, gathering her courage. "My mother said sometime, a midwife can reach in and guide the baby into the right position." The look of terror on Isaac's face would have been comical under different circumstances. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted. "I could hurt you or the baby." "You won't," Hannah assured him, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "I trust you, Isaac. We don't have a choice." Following Hannah's instructions, gleaned from conversations with her mother years ago and her own instincts, Isaac carefully helped reposition the baby. The pain was excruciating, but Hannah bit down on a folded cloth and endured it with only muffled cries. When the next contraction came, Hannah felt a difference immediately. "It's working," she gasped. "The baby's moving." 3 more contractions, each more powerful than the last, and suddenly Isaac was exclaiming, "I can see the head, Hannah. Keep pushing." With one final, monumental effort, Hannah felt the baby slip from her body into Isaac's waiting hands. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The baby, tiny, blue-tinged, and silent, lay cradled in Isaac's palms. "Why isn't the baby crying?" Hannah asked, panic rising in her throat. "Isaac, why isn't our baby crying?" Isaac, his face pale but determined, gently turned the infant over and patted its back, just as he'd seen done with newborn calves that struggled to take their first breath. Nothing happened. He tried again, more firmly this time, desperation making his movements less gentle than he intended. "Please," Hannah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please, God, let our baby live." As if in answer to her prayer, the tiny infant suddenly jerked and let out a weak cough, followed by the most beautiful sound Hannah had ever heard, a high, indignant wail that filled the cabin and seemed to chase away the shadows of fear that had been gathering. "It's a boy," Isaac choked out, his own tears falling freely now as he carefully wrapped their son in a clean blanket. "We have a son, Hannah." He placed the crying infant on Hannah's chest, where the baby instinctively nuzzled against her. Hannah looked down at the tiny, red face of her son, overcome with a love so powerful it took her breath away. "Joseph," she whispered, touching the baby's cheek with a trembling finger. Joseph Young. Isaac sat beside them on the bed, one arm around Hannah's shoulders and the other hand gently supporting their son. For a long moment, they simply stared at the miracle they had created together, both of them crying tears of joy and relief. "I thought I'd lost you both," Isaac finally said, his voice raw with emotion. When he wasn't breathing, Hannah leaned into his embrace. "But you saved him. You brought our son into this world, Isaac." As little Joseph's cries quieted into contented gurgles, the new parents marveled at his perfect fingers and the tuft of dark hair that already showed signs of curling like his father's. "He has your nose," Isaac observed with a watery smile. "Poor kid." Hannah laughed softly. "And your chin. He's going to be as handsome as his father." The blizzard continued for 2 more days, keeping them isolated from town. By the time the snow had cleared enough for travel, Hannah had recovered her strength, and little Joseph was proving himself to be a healthy, hungry baby despite his early arrival. Isaac rode into Williamsburg as soon as the trail was passable, returning with Doc Thompson, who pronounced both mother and child to be doing remarkably well under the circumstances. "You did a fine job delivering this young man," the doctor told Isaac. Not many men would have kept their heads in such a situation. Isaac shrugged modestly. "I just did what needed doing." Hannah was the brave one. News of little Joseph's dramatic entry into the world spread quickly through Williamsburg. Neighbors began arriving with gifts, hand-knitted blankets, jars of preserved fruits, even a beautifully carved wooden cradle from the town's carpenter. "It's tradition," explained Mrs. Miller, the wife of Isaac's employer, as she set a basket of fresh baked goods on the table. "First baby born after the first blizzard gets special attention, especially one that gave his parents such a scare." As winter deepened, the young family settled into their new routines. Isaac still had his duties at the Miller Ranch, but he arranged his schedule to spend more time at home, never wanting to be far from Hannah and Joseph. The baby thrived under his parents' devoted care, growing stronger and more alert with each passing day. Hannah, who had once feared she would always be alone after her parents' deaths, now found herself at the center of a loving family and a supportive community. The cabin that had seemed so empty just a year ago was now filled with the sounds of her son's cries and laughter, her husband's deep voice singing off-key lullabies, and the constant rhythm of life being lived fully. One evening, as they sat before the fire with Joseph sleeping peacefully in his cradle, Isaac took Hannah's hand in his. "Do you remember the day we met, when I rode up to your homestead?" Hannah smiled at the memory. "You looked like something out of a dime novel, all dusty and mysterious. And you were pointing a gun at me from behind your apron," Isaac chuckled. "I knew right then you were special." "Is that so?" Hannah raised an eyebrow. "It took me a bit longer to decide about you." Isaac's expression grew serious. "When I made that promise to your father, I never imagined I'd find everything I never knew I wanted. You and Joseph, you're my whole world, Hannah." She leaned into him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "And you're ours." Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. The cattle had weathered the winter well, and Isaac had managed to save enough to purchase 10 more head, expanding their small herd. Hannah's vegetable garden flourished in the rich, moist soil, and she began selling the excess produce in town, building a reputation for having the finest tomatoes and beans in the county. Joseph, now nearly 5 months old, was a happy, chubby baby who delighted in watching the world around him from the safety of his mother's arms or the makeshift sling she used to carry him while working. His dark curls had grown thicker, and his eyes had settled into the same deep blue as Hannah's. One sunny afternoon in late April, as Hannah was hanging laundry to dry with Joseph gurgling in his basket nearby, she spotted a familiar figure on horseback approaching. Isaac wasn't due back from the ranch until evening, but there was no mistaking his tall frame or the distinctive gait of his favorite horse. "What brings you home so early?" she called as he dismounted. Isaac's face was alight with excitement. "I've got news," he said, sweeping her into his arms for a kiss before bending to lift Joseph from his basket. The baby immediately grabbed at his father's beard with pudgy fingers, making them both laugh. "Mr. Miller is retiring," Isaac continued. "His sons have no interest in ranching, both gone east to Boston for business. He's offered to sell me a portion of his land, the section that borders our property to the west." Hannah's eyes widened. "Can we afford it?" "He's offering fair terms. Says he'd rather see the land go to someone who loves it than to some eastern speculator." Isaac bounced Joseph gently in his arms. "It would mean we could triple our herd size, maybe even breed horses eventually. It's good land, Hannah, water access, sheltered grazing." The prospect was both thrilling and daunting. "It would be a lot of work," Hannah said thoughtfully, "and a lot of responsibility." "It would," Isaac agreed, "but we wouldn't be doing it alone." He hesitated. Miller also mentioned that his foreman's cabin would be part of the deal. "It's twice the size of ours, with a proper kitchen and 3 bedrooms. 3 bedrooms, Hannah repeated, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Planning on filling them, Mr. Young?" Isaac's cheeks reddened slightly. "Well, I was thinking Joseph might like a brother or sister someday. Maybe more than one." Hannah stretched up on her toes to kiss him. "I think that sounds like a fine plan." The deal was finalized by midsummer. The Young family moved into the larger cabin, which sat on a gentle rise overlooking both their original homestead and the newly acquired grazing lands. Isaac hired 2 young cowboys to help with the expanded herd, building a bunkhouse for them near the main barn. Hannah took to her role as the mistress of a growing ranch with natural ease. She managed the household, continued her vegetable garden now expanded to include herbs and berries, and still found time to ride out with Isaac occasionally to check the cattle. Joseph secured safely against her in his sling. "You're a natural horsewoman," Isaac observed as they rode back to the ranch one evening, the setting sun painting the Montana sky in brilliant hues. "Most city women never get comfortable in the saddle." Hannah laughed. "I wasn't always comfortable. My father had to practically tie me to the horse when I was a girl. I was terrified of falling." "What changed?" Isaac asked. Hannah looked down at Joseph, who was sleeping peacefully despite the horse's movement. "I realized some things are worth being brave for." As their first anniversary approached, Hannah began planning a special dinner to celebrate. She traded some of her preserved vegetables for a bottle of wine from the mercantile and spent the day baking a cake with precious sugar they rarely indulged in. Isaac returned from checking the northern pasture to find the cabin filled with delicious smells, and Hannah dressed in her best dress, the blue one that matched her eyes and that she'd worn on their wedding day. "What's all this?" he asked, looking around at the table set with their good dishes, a wedding gift from the townspeople and a vase of wildflowers at its center. "Happy anniversary," Hannah said, moving into his embrace. "1 year since you made an honest woman of me." Isaac grinned. "Best decision I ever made." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have something for you. It's not much," but Hannah unwrapped the gift to find a delicate silver locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny portrait of Isaac on one side and a lock of Joseph's dark hair on the other. "Isaac," she breathed, tears welling in her eyes. "It's beautiful. Had it made in Billings last time I went to sell cattle," he explained, fastening it around her neck. Wanted you to always have us close to your heart, even when we're not right beside you." "I love it," Hannah said. "And I love you," she hesitated. "I have something for you too, though it's not quite ready yet." Isaac raised an eyebrow. "Oh," Hannah took his hand and placed it over her stomach. "Should be ready in about 7 months, though." For a moment, Isaac simply stared at her, not comprehending. Then understanding dawned on his face, followed by pure joy. "Another baby, are you sure?" Hannah nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around. "Quite sure. Doc Thompson confirmed it yesterday when I went into town." Isaac set her down gently, suddenly concerned. "Are you feeling all right? Should you be resting? What about the cake? Should you be on your feet so much?" "Isaac," Hannah said firmly, though she was still smiling. "I'm with child, not made of glass. Women have been having babies and baking cakes since the beginning of time, remember." He had the grace to look sheepish. "Right, sorry, it's just." He looked over at Joseph, who was watching them with curious eyes from his play area near the hearth. "I never thought I could be this happy, Hannah. Sometimes I'm afraid it's all a dream." Hannah leaned into him, savoring the solid reality of his arms around her. "If it is, we're dreaming it together." The news of Hannah's second pregnancy was met with delight throughout Williamsburg. The town had grown considerably since Hannah had first arrived with her parents nearly a decade ago, but it still maintained its close-knit community feel, with neighbors looking out for one another through hardship and celebration alike. As her pregnancy progressed, Hannah found herself increasingly grateful for that community. The morning sickness this time was more severe than it had been with Joseph, leaving her exhausted and unable to keep up with all her usual tasks. The 2 young ranch hands Isaac had hired proved themselves invaluable, taking on extra work without complaint, and the women of Williamsburg organized themselves into a rotation, dropping by regularly with meals and offering to watch Joseph for a few hours so Hannah could rest. "I don't know what we'd do without you all," Hannah told Mrs. Peterson one afternoon as the older woman rocked a fussy Joseph while Hannah managed to eat her first full meal in days. "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson replied briskly. "This is what neighbors do. You do the same for any of us." Her expression softened. "Besides, it does my old heart good to have a little one to cuddle. My grandchildren are all back east with my daughter." By the time winter set in again, Hannah's strength had returned, though her belly was now prominently rounded beneath her dresses. Joseph, at just over a year old, was walking with increasing confidence and developing a vocabulary that consisted primarily of ma, pa, and a very emphatic no. The second winter of their marriage proved milder than the first, with steady snowfall but none of the devastating blizzards that had marked Joseph's birth. Still, Isaac took no chances, ensuring they were well stocked with supplies and that a path to town was always kept clear in case they needed the doctor. "Not taking any risks this time," he declared as he stacked firewood high against the cabin wall. "This baby is going to arrive with Doc Thompson right here, even if I have to carry him through 10 feet of snow myself." Hannah smiled at his determination. "The baby's not due until February, Isaac. I'm sure the weather will cooperate." February arrived with unexpected warmth, a false spring that melted much of the snow and brought the first tentative bird song back to the trees around their property. Hannah, now in her final weeks of pregnancy, found herself restless, spending long hours rearranging the nursery and knitting tiny garments for the new baby. "You should be resting," Isaac scolded gently, finding her on her hands and knees scrubbing the kitchen floor one afternoon. Hannah sat back on her heels, blowing a strand of hair from her flushed face. "I can't just sit and wait, Isaac. It's driving me mad." He helped her to her feet, his hands lingering protectively over her rounded belly. "Then let's go for a walk." The air's warm today, and you've been cooped up too long." They strolled slowly around the ranch yard, Joseph toddling between them, each of his small hands firmly gripping one of his parents' fingers. The little boy was fascinated by everything: the chickens pecking in the dirt, the horses watching curiously from the corral, the patches of green grass already emerging from beneath the melting snow. "Pa, Pa!" Joseph suddenly exclaimed, pointing toward the barn where one of the ranch hands was leading out a horse. "Ho! That's right, son," Isaac said proudly. "Horse, you're getting to be such a big boy, aren't you?" Hannah felt a sudden tightening across her abdomen, different from the practice contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. She gripped Isaac's arm, her breath catching. "Hannah," Isaac's voice sharpened with concern. "What is it?" "I think," she managed as the sensation eased, "that our second child might be ready to join us." Unlike Joseph's dramatic entrance into the world, their daughter's birth proceeded with remarkable smoothness. Doc Thompson arrived within the hour, having been in the area visiting another patient. Mrs. Peterson came to care for Joseph, whisking the confused toddler off to her home where her husband entertained him with wooden toys and stories. Isaac remained by Hannah's side throughout the labor, his quiet strength a constant reassurance as she worked to bring their child into the world. Just as the sun was setting, casting long golden rays through the bedroom window, Mary Elizabeth Young announced her arrival with a strong, healthy cry that brought tears to both her parents' eyes. "She's perfect," Isaac whispered, cradling his daughter with a gentleness that belied his weathered cowboy exterior. "Look at all that hair, she's going to be beautiful like her mama." Hannah, exhausted but radiant, watched as Isaac held their daughter close to his chest, the baby's cries softening to contented gurgles as she settled against her father's warmth. "She knows your voice," Hannah said, "from all those stories you told her while she was growing." Isaac looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd hear a baby cry and feel this way," he admitted. "When Joseph was born and he didn't cry at first, I thought my heart would stop, but now hearing Mary—" He shook his head, unable to find the words. Hannah understood completely. "It's like hearing life itself, isn't it? The most beautiful sound in the world." Isaac carefully placed Mary in Hannah's arms, then sat beside them on the bed, one arm encircling his wife's shoulders as they both gazed down at their daughter's perfect face. "Our family," he said softly. "What started with just the two of us has grown into something more wonderful than I could have imagined." As the years passed, the young ranch prospered along with its family. Isaac's careful management and Hannah's tireless work transformed what had been Hannah's struggling homestead into one of the most successful operations in the county. They added a third child, another son named William, 3 years after Mary's birth, completing their family. Joseph grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's build and his mother's eyes, showing a natural talent for working with the horses that became the ranch's specialty. Mary, with her mother's determination and her father's charm, became known throughout Williamsburg for her intelligence and kind heart. And little William, the baby of the family, combined his siblings' best qualities with a mischievous spirit that kept everyone on their toes. On a warm summer evening in 1893, 15 years after Isaac had first ridden up to Hannah's homestead, the young family gathered on the wide porch of their ranch house, no longer the foreman's cabin, but a proper home they'd built as the ranch flourished. Hannah, now 41 but still as vibrant as ever, leaned against the railing, watching her children and husband engaged in an impromptu game of catch in the yard. "Ma, watch this," 13-year-old William called, attempting to catch the ball behind his back and, predictably, missing entirely. "Very impressive," Hannah called back with a laugh. Isaac, His hair now streaked with gray, but his movements still strong and sure, scooped up the ball and tossed it gently to 11-year-old Mary, who caught it with surprising grace. At 15, Joseph was nearly as tall as his father, his voice deepening into the man he was becoming. As the light faded and the first stars appeared in the Montana sky, Hannah called her family in for supper. They gathered around the large oak table that Isaac had built when they'd moved into the new house, passing dishes and sharing stories of their day. "Pa," Joseph said during a lull in the conversation, "Hank Bradley offered me a job helping with his new horses. Said I have a way with them he hasn't seen in someone my age before." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "Hank knows good horseflesh. It's a fine compliment." "So I can take the job?" Joseph asked eagerly. Isaac glanced at Hannah, a silent communication passing between them. "We'll discuss the details," he said. "But yes, if that's what you want, you can take the job." Joseph's face lit up. "Thanks, Pa." Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Hannah and Isaac sat on the porch swing, a quilt draped over their laps against the cooling night air. The sounds of the ranch at night surrounded them, cattle lowing softly in the distance, horses moving in the corral, the subtle creaking of the house settling. "Our boy's growing up," Isaac said, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Won't be long before he's out on his own." Hannah nodded, a bittersweet ache in her chest at the thought. "That's as it should be. We've raised them to be independent, to follow their dreams." "Like you did?" Isaac asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Standing your ground on your father's homestead, even when everyone said a woman couldn't manage alone." "I wasn't alone for long," Hannah reminded him. "You rode in like something from a storybook, remember?" Isaac chuckled. "Some storybook hero. I was dusty, broke, and half-starved from the trail. Perfect, in other words," Hannah said softly. "Exactly what I needed, even if I didn't know it yet." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, rocking gently as the night deepened around them. "Do you ever wonder," Hannah finally asked, "what would have happened if you hadn't kept your promise to my father, if you'd never come to Williamsburg looking for me?" Isaac considered this. "I think I'd have always felt something missing. Like there was a place I was meant to be but hadn't found yet." He squeezed her hand. "What about you? Do you ever regret staying? You could have sold the homestead, gone back east like so many did." Hannah shook her head firmly. "Never. This land, this life, it's everything to me. More now than ever, because it's where we built our family." She turned to look at him, her blue eyes as bright as they'd been when they first met. "I wouldn't change a single moment, Isaac. Not one." He leaned in to kiss her, still marveling after all these years at how perfectly they fit together. "Neither would I, Hannah. Neither would I." As they made their way back inside, hand in hand, Hannah paused to look up at the star-filled Montana sky. From inside the house came the soft sounds of their children sleeping, Joseph's deep breathing, Mary's occasional murmur, William's quiet snores. The sounds of the family she'd created with the man she loved in this place that had tested and rewarded them in equal measure. She'd once thought, in those dark days after losing her parents, that she would never know such fullness of heart again. Never hear a baby's cry or feel the warm weight of a child in her arms. But life on the frontier had taught her that endings often led to new beginnings, and that love, when given room to grow, could flourish even in the harshest conditions. Isaac held the door open for her, his smile as warm and steady as it had been on the day they wed. Hannah stepped inside, into the home they had built together, carrying the memory of that long-ago day when a dusty cowboy had ridden up to her homestead and changed her life forever. The door closed softly behind them, but the story of the young family of Hannah and Isaac, and the love that had overcome loss, distance, and hardship, would be told in Williamsburg for generations to come. a testament to the enduring power of promises, kept in hearts that refuse to be defeated by loneliness or fear. And somewhere in the vast Montana night, the stars continued their ancient dance, bearing witness to the small miracle of a family that had found its way home to each other, against all odds, in the wild expanse of the American West.